Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to another episode of Saudi Arabia from a Saudi perspective.
Mr. Khaled Almaeena, the world is facing a horrific pandemic in the form of the coronavirus. It started a little over 2 years ago when it reached the borders of Saudi Arabia. How did the kingdom handle it in its infancy stage?
From a word that was not even known by the majority of the Saudis, COVID-19, to be known and spread across Saudi Arabia in a few short weeks itself is an achievement. Because when the COVID hit parts of the world, in China and other places, we looked at it. But when it came and touched our door and opened the door and went and spread, I think the government, the authorities, and the people rose up. Slowly, there was an awareness growing up that this is something to be taken care of seriously. Because we usually scoff, oh, cholera, typhoid happening in other parts of the world, even Ebola fever. But this one hit really home. Initially, the first thing that happened was some of the measures that took place. Number one, before the vaccinations, there was the banning of meetings, weddings, other places where people would gather. Again, after a few weeks, what happened was total lockdown. Now this, you see, was really upsetting to many people. And for those people who are usually at ease sitting in the evenings on the corniche or sitting in a coffee shop or sitting elsewhere or gathering with friends, to have a drastic, up to down order not to meet was a bit discomforting. At first I was also a bit uncomfortable, but by and large, when you see that all these steps and measures were taken for the larger good of society, I think everyone got in. And I must say, I was frankly surprised to see the discipline initiated by young and old as they waited to face this, the consequences of this, without knowing much what type of disease was coming in. All kinds of rumors floated of people having chest pains, fevers, somebody even mentioned dementia. But then the government was quick to react, and credit should be given to the Ministry of Health that really came in and started apprising the people of the danger of this COVID.
Sir, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit our shores, how did the government handle keeping people informed about not only the disease itself, but the rules and regulations put in place to keep them safe?
Right from the word go, the Ministry of Health turned up in every place through the media, through newspapers, through television, social media, ads all over. And I think this sort of pushed this danger that was looming on the horizon across the world and now had entered Saudi Arabian boundaries. It was very important. Some tough decisions were taken. There were curfew, there were visiting hours, people had to wear masks, they had to wear gloves, curtailing of visits to hospitals, decreasing the number of people initially at weddings, at other social functions, and later on the figures dwindled to a great extent. And some other tough political decisions were taken of closing the mosques and the Haramain, because the idea was that the larger good of the masses, of the people here, was much more important. And surprisingly, the Saudi population and the expatriates who lived here took to it like a duck takes to water. They followed the rules willingly. But when people saw all around them in first world countries, people falling down like flies, I think they began to thank the authorities for putting into place such stringent measures that finally helped us to push down the figures in Saudi Arabia.
Mr. Khaled Almaeena, when the pandemic hit and the decision to close the Haramain was made, the Saudi Arabian economy was affected through tourism and other avenues of spending that comes from people visiting the holy mosques. What happened afterwards?
I think the economy was affected not only in Mecca and Medina by the closure of the Haramain, but also across Saudi Arabia when shops were closed, retail shops were closed, malls were closed, the cinemas were closed, other places too had limited people visiting them. But the larger good was more important. One thing that also came out was the government pumped in a lot of money into the healthcare business. For example, the buying of all these vaccines, when the vaccinations started, getting free treatment to those who went into the ICUs. And another feature that came out was that the government did not distinguish between a Saudi, a non-Saudi, an expatriate, an immigrant whose papers were not in order, and did not focus on the caste or the creed of anyone. I was sitting waiting for a vaccination, and across me were 3 people from 3 different faiths sitting. Nobody asked them where they came from, what they did. They were there because there was a direct order from the Saudi government that everyone in Saudi Arabia should be treated. Unlike other countries where people had to pay in hundreds of thousands of dollars for the stay in hospitals, for the emergency rooms and all, the Saudi government took care of the payment for each and every person within its boundaries, be they Saudis or non-Saudis.
Sir, as the pandemic matured and progressed, how did Saudi Arabia progress with it?
I think also the Saudi population matured health-wise because they were reading. The Saudis are voracious readers. They follow what's happening in and around the world. They started to take care of themselves, donning on the masks, putting on gloves, moving around, keeping away from each other, because we are a society that culturally likes to embrace and kiss each other on the cheek. A lot of people stopped this, in fact, and spoke about it, and even relatives and others also kept a safe distance. So the word social distancing became a hallmark. It became really a part of the Saudi culture. Elevators had limited numbers. Seats across airports and other places which opened up also were distant from each other. Passengers would not go in. At the same time, they initiated some good response system of the vaccination, tawakkulna, and other new methodologies that kept the authorities aware of what's going and also of the flow and the movement of this pandemic. At that stage, the shisha places opened up, restaurants opened up, other places where people frequent, bowling alleys, snooker halls opened up, but again under strict observation, and anyone violating a minor rule would be stopped from operating because they didn't follow the rules. And this to me showed clearly that the maturity level in the health sphere in Saudi Arabia has gone up by leaps and bounds.
Sir, how did the Saudi government dissuade people from breaking the rules and refusing to follow the guidelines for the pandemic?
It's a carrot and stick policy. The carrot policy is giving you an awareness program, free brochures, you have free treatment, therefore people became lax. But for those in society who sometimes let their guards down, I think the government was very strict and did come up with fines, hefty fines. People were not allowed to go in government buildings and even non-governmental buildings if they don't have the mask. So I think these two issues of fines and awareness program and trying to create a mental register in the minds of the people that this pandemic is here to stay. We've got to live with it, but we've got to live it by our own terms rather than the pandemic get hold and control over us due to our laxity or carelessness. Policies and procedures were put into place. These were highlighted by everyone, by the media, by the government, and the everyday notices that we would get in all social media to put on the masks, to put on gloves, to take care of ourselves, even how to wash our hands. Every day these directives and circulars are put in place. The authorities had many things in place. For example, that tawakkalna, and if you refuse to have tawakkulna and follow rules and regulations and procedures, the government came up with hefty fines. And if you hit the pocket, you put everybody in line.
Mr. Khaled Almaeena, the pandemic is now approaching Saudi Arabia with a brand new wave, as it is the entire world, in the form of the Omicron virus, a variant of COVID-19. How is the Saudi government going to handle this moving forward?
Well, it will handle it as it handled it before. By now, there is total awareness among the population. The healthcare authorities know everything and have put everything in place. And I think they know the dangers of this pandemic. So I think things will be much better and everything will be all right in the future, provided we go ahead with the system that has been put in place.